Hello, world. Uh, this is awkward for me. I'm not used to the cameras, and it feels like it's in my personal space. But to those of you I know and love from our church group, look forward to seeing you next week or the next time we're able. For those of you who are with us because Bob is Facebook famous, hello, my name is Caleb Farah, and I live out here in the country. Just a little background about myself. I've got 3 sons and a wonderful wife, and we have almost a petting zoo, it seems like, out at my house. We have cows and sheep and poultry and pigs and milk cows and horses and kind of the whole ball of wax there. And so I like to start with just a story about what happened to me this last week and kind of how it helped me prepare for this week. We've got sheep as well, and we had one evening, it just wasn't there. It wasn't in the pen. The others were there, and it was like the biblical lost sheep. And we searched all over. We looked and we looked, and the boys walked up and down the creek. Monty and I looked, couldn't find her anywhere. We prayed for her. We looked the next 2 days, and she just disappeared, and no trace of her. The only time we've had anything happen like that, we had a few years ago. We believe a mountain lion got a calf, and they'll bury the carcass and you won't find anything. And so we were concerned that it happened, but we kept praying, and I got a phone call on the following Monday morning. She just showed up at the neighbor's house, and it was just encouraging. And you know, I thought my lesson I was learning there was that you've got to keep praying for those lost sheep in your life, and not to give up and to have faith. So we went over and we got her home and got her pinned up and fixed the spot in the pen, and things went really well for a day, and then she disappeared again. And that seems to be the nature of lost sheep. And the following morning, I got ready. We did the same thing again. We walked all over the place, up and down the creek, called her name, shook the cake bucket. She's just gone again. The following morning, I had to work, and there she is on the side of the road, wanting to be found. Not wanting to come home, but wanting to be looked for and pursued. And I think we're all that way sometimes. We want to be pursued. But I got out of the pickup, and I held my hand out like I had some cake for her, some sheep feed, and she came up close and she sniffed and she called my bluff. She knew I didn't have anything, and she would stay just far enough that she knew I couldn't get her. So I called in reinforcements, and the boys came with the pickup and the trailer, and I had them bring a rope, and so we try and surround her. And I'm not very agile. I had an accident a few years ago, and I do pretty good in a straight line, but up and down hills and side to side, I don't really excel. And I'm not much of a cowboy when it comes to swinging a rope either. But Dominic, I think he's my youngest son, was being gracious, and he hands me the rope and says, "Here, Dad, you rope, and I'll chase her by you," because he knows I can't move real well. So we kind of corral her, and she's heading towards a tree, and it goes down a draw and it washes out, and so not my best territory there. And she runs by down at an angle under the tree, and I just throw the rope, more to say I threw the rope than anything, and had no expectation to catch her. And I start coiling back up just instinctively because I don't think I've caught her, and she hits the end of the rope, and the slack comes out and jerks me, and we get her. And so I thought my new lesson that I've got from this is sometimes you don't have to be very competent. God just wants you to do your part and step out there in faith, and sometimes you just got to throw a loop, and He'll take care of the details. And that's how I feel about today's Sunday school lesson. I'm not the most qualified for today's subject matter. There are those in our church who are wiser and have more experience, and I really wanted to find a reason for somebody else to teach. But it was my time to step out in faith and to throw a loop. So here we go, and be patient with me. The name of today's lesson is Following God's Design. And, you know, no matter what we do in life, there's always a design. There's a way that things should be done, whether it's building a house or working cattle. There's a way that works better, and that if you'll follow that established pattern, you can make it easier on yourself instead of reinventing the wheel and having some disasters. And today, that's what we're going to talk about, is God's plan and God's design for the family. And we're going to be in Proverbs chapter 5 and verse 3. And the author is Solomon, who's supposed to have been the wisest man to ever live, except for Jesus. And so we're going to depend on his wisdom, not mine. I'm just going to start reading here in verse 3. Though the lips of the forbidden woman drip honey and her words are smoother than oil, in the end she's as bitter as wormwood and as sharp as a double-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps head straight for Sheol. She doesn't consider the path of life. She doesn't know her ways are unstable. Like I say, this is coming from Solomon, who's supposed to be very wise. And I get to thinking about there's different ways to get wisdom. There's God-given wisdom that Solomon got because that's what he prayed for. And then we can be taught things and acquire wisdom. Sometimes we can learn from other people's mistakes and gather wisdom that way. And some of us just have to find out the hard way. And Solomon, he had the opportunity in all these things. He had been raised in large part by the prophet. His dad was busy running the kingdom, David was, and so he had been taught about God's ways. He also had the opportunity to learn from other people. His mother, Bathsheba, David had an affair with her, had her husband killed off in battle so he could marry her. And it caused all kinds of drama within his family and fighting between him and his brothers for who was going to be king, and lots of issues between David's wives and lots of consequences there. He had the opportunity to see and learn from others, but he didn't pick it up that way. Solomon, like so many of us, had to learn things the hard way. And so he speaks from experience. But he goes on to address his sons, and he says, "So now, sons, listen to me. Don't turn away from the words of my mouth. Keep your way far from her. Don't go near the door of her house." And, you know, this applies for anything that we struggle with in our lives, any temptation we have, and it doesn't apply just to the sexual realm or in relationships, but the best way not to find temptation is not to put yourself in that situation. If it's a relationship, you don't put yourself in an awkward situation. You hear so many times in the news about what happened when they were just up at the motel room visiting, or a guy knows he's got a drinking problem, or he's had problems with his decision making he's made before, and he goes to the bar and drinks with his buddies. You're making that decision before you get in a compromised position. If it's pornography, you hold yourself accountable and you don't stay with the computer and no one else, and no accountability. You don't put yourself in that position of temptation. He's saying, stay away. Don't put yourself there. I think of our Vice President Mike Pence, I've heard this story before about how he won't go eat or be in a situation alone with another woman. And he was really ridiculed and made fun of because of that fact. But I think he's been married 35 years or so. And for somebody in a position of power in our modern society, I think that in and of itself is a testament to the effectiveness of making your decisions before you're tempted. He goes on in verse 9, otherwise you will give up your vitality to others and your years to someone cruel. Strangers will drain your resources and your hard-earned pay will end up in a foreigner's house. At the end of your life, you will lament when your physical body has been consumed. There's consequences, and he's talking about those consequences, about a loss of pay and disease, and there's consequences even when we find forgiveness, even when we've learned those hard lessons and we've acquired that wisdom. There's still consequences we have to work through, and he's trying to help his sons avoid those and have a better, easier life. Just like we talked about building a house, if you've cut your board too short and it won't fit, it's just too short. You've got that consequence. Even if you've learned to measure twice, you've already made that mistake, and there's going to be some consequences, and it's going to take some extra repair to get through that. As we get into verse 15, I start to think about water, which I've got here. And he uses the illustration of water. I think it's very appropriate and something we can really relate to here in the Texas Panhandle. We've been hot and dry. It's been 100 degrees and is supposed to continue to be 100 plus. But water's something that we all need, and it's a common thread. And it was very dry in Solomon's time and area. And we think about the Texas Panhandle here, we don't realize how dry it would be if it weren't for our modern conveniences. You know, thank God that we're doing this in the air conditioner and we have running water. And in our area, we've had electricity out the last couple of days with the heat and not having air conditioning and water for animals and stuff. It really occurred to us at my house in a hurry how dependent we are. But we need a rain, and in this area, before there were windmills or electricity, it was a long ways from the Canadian River in town to the church here. There's not any natural water. There's a few springs in our area, but all the water in all the places that you see between town and here or where there's been windmills put in or water wells, and it was a precious commodity at that time, just like it was in biblical times. But verse 15, it says, drink water from your own cistern, water flowing from your own well. And in the context of our lesson, he's talking about getting your needs met in a biblically blessed relationship from your wife, your husband. And he's not saying that those needs are wrong. Just like we need water, there's a right way to get those needs met. And for those of you that don't know what a cistern is, it was a way to catch and maintain that rainwater when times were good and there was water. You'd store that up. And I'm learning still that we need to do that in our relationships. And as time changes, we go through seasons in life, and there's times when there's more rain, when there's more physical intimacy. There's times when we're just naturally closer to our spouses, and there's times that are harder when we go through difficulties in life or we have physical ailments and stuff. And if we learn to store up those good feelings and those relationship perks, you know, then there's a reserve for those hard times that you can draw on. And, you know, this may not be politically correct, but some of you may have noticed that men and women are different. And we have different needs and different strengths. We're complementary to each other. There's that equal but different. And my wife and most women have different needs than men. And I had it explained to me when I was a younger man by a wiser pastor that I needed to think about ovens and microwaves. And men tend to be more like microwaves. We're in a hurry, and it's not hard to get us satisfied in what we need. And women tend to be more like an oven in that it needs to preheat, and that all the emotional needs and all of those things that a lot of times men tend not to consider need to be in line before anything else. And we can build on that reserve and that relationship and focus on that as well. And you know, this is written primarily to men and to sons, but that's a two-part need. And women have that emotional need, and men do too, but that's something that we can invest in and build up as well, and be conscious of each other's needs. Going on in 16, it says, should your springs flow into the streets, streams into the public squares, they should be for you alone and not for you to share with strangers. Again, it's talking about conserving what you have and making the most of it and not squandering it. And I'm needing a lot of water today. And I've brought my little visual guide here. It's 112, so Bonnie wouldn't let me borrow her hat. You know, it's warm out today. I don't know what the temperature is, but this glass represents our cistern. And, you know, we've got water in it. And when you've not got nearly enough water and a limited supply, you've got to protect that. And you don't want to be willy-nilly using that, pouring it out in the streets, squandering it on those that it shouldn't be given to, wasting it to play and make mud cakes. And we've also got to worry about purity in a relationship or in your well. And, you know, if you start talking about poison, how much is okay? A little bit? What if it's just a little bit? If this is arsenic, do you still want to drink it? It doesn't take very much, just a few drops, and that creates contention. And you can look at this and say, well, that's 99.9% good, clean water. It's only got a few drops of anything else in it. And we can rationalize and justify, but it does that damage to that relationship. And it may be that we're getting our needs met for intimacy through Facebook, or we're flirting a little more, we're talking to that person a little more than we should, and we're not getting that emotional need met at home, or we're just looking a little bit at that stuff that we know we shouldn't be looking at, even if it's not a really bad site, it's just kind of questionable on the internet, news sites. It just builds up yuckiness and a poison in our relationship. and it makes it difficult and contentious. And we can point to the fact that it's not muddy, there's no algae growing in here, there's nothing really awful, but it's not the kind of pure and sweet relationship that God has intended for us. And it starts to have those consequences. And Solomon is challenging us to have that pureness and that goodness and those blessings that come from that relationship. In 18, it says, "Let your fountain be blessed, and take pleasure in the wife of your youth." He's saying, enjoy those blessings. Enjoy that relationship. When hard times come, then you've got that supply, that help. You know, hard times came in my life, in my married life. We've lost a child, and that's a hard situation. But if you've built your relationship with God and with your spouse, you've been through some hard times, you know that you're there for each other. When I got hurt, it was a very hard time, but my wife was there for me, and I've been there when she's had problems. And if you strengthen and you work on those relationships, whether it's small things, my wife is very good at gift giving, and bless her heart, that's not my love language. And I recommend, there's a book, I believe it's called The 7 Love Languages, and it talks about people have different love languages, different ways that they feel loved or express love. Some of us really like to be complimented. Verbally, it's a big deal to us to be told that we're doing a good job, that we're handsome or pretty, or it's a very verbal thing. For others, it's physical touch, and whether that's an intimate physical touch or just being patted on the back, given a hug. We all know people that are huggers, you know, that's how they express love, you know, and some of us are that way. Others, it's an act of service, and I tend to fall in this, and you know, so I think if I do the dishes, I'm expressing love, or if I pick up, you know, usually it's my own mess, but heaven forbid I pick up anybody else's mess, I think that that's an act of love. That's how I express love, and that's what means a lot to me, is if somebody does something for me, it means a lot to me. And some people, it's just spending time together in the quality of talking to each other and just being together. And there's several others, but we all tend to express love to other people the way we want to be loved. The unfortunate reality is, a lot of times that's not the way they express love, and it reciprocates. They express it to you in a way that's not your love language. And I'm a terrible gift giver. And so that's something that I know I can consciously do and work on, is to give my wife gifts. And it doesn't need to be a diamond ring or a new boat or a chocolate, or, you know, it's the simplest thing. It's a condition of the heart to her. It's that I'm thinking about her. That's how she can tell that I care about her. I'm thinking about her. If I would make myself stop on the way home and pick a wildflower for her, it'd mean the world to her. And I'd be putting water into that cistern. And if we step back, we can think about in our relationships how we can follow that design and pay attention to how we can love our kids or our spouse or a coworker, those people that we're invested in, a friendship, a mentor. Think about those people and how they try and express things to you, and I just challenge you to try and reach out to one another that way. And I like I said, I don't feel qualified for today's lesson, but I feel blessed to have had the opportunity because it's made me think, and it's stretched me, and it stretched me to sit here in front of the camera, and it gives me an extra appreciation. And Bob's to be commended. Change is hard. It's really hard. And there's not many pastors at a church the size of Locust Grove or with the experience that Bob has that will be willing to step out and to change and to make lemonade when life gives you lemons. And I just appreciate him, and more so today when I'm sitting in his seat. And thank you all for being patient, and I'd like to close with a prayer right quick. Heavenly Father, I just thank you for loving us and for caring about us enough to lay out a plan and to give us that guidance that we need. And I pray that you'll give us the wisdom to not just hear the plan, but to accept it and to follow it. I thank you for giving us your word and showing us examples of people who did well and others who didn't, so that we can learn from that. I pray, Lord, that you'll help us each to reach out to and mentor one another, and that you'll help us to be humble and to be willing to learn from one another. I thank you for Jesus and his love and the forgiveness we have through him, and it's in his name we pray today. Amen. Thank you all.